Calling the zoning hearing board for Lower Makefield Township for July 18th, 2023 to order. First up, I believe that there's a request for continuance.
Yeah, we're going to go a little out of order. So we will do, I guess it's number 6 is the request for continuance. You want to, and we have counsel here for the other ones. So we'll call up Mike McGinnis for that one. It's appeal Z-23-2016.
Thank you. Good evening, Mike McGinnis here on behalf of the applicant for the subject appeal. I apologize for the late notice. We are requesting a continuance this evening in preparation for our presentation. It was discovered that the dwelling unit per acreage calculation needs to be revised to account for the net acreage rather than the gross acreage of the site. Because of that, the application would need to be re-advertised, and therefore we thought it prudent to request a continuance in light of the underlying facts. And we did not peg a specific date because of the re-advertisement. So my suggestion, if it's okay with the board, would be for me to interface with Mr. Majewski and Ms. Kirk and Mr. Flager and pick a date that would be mutually satisfactory to my client, our professionals, and the board as well for the meeting to be rescheduled.
That makes sense. We consider that. I also want to point out that our August 1st meeting is already thoroughly committed, and we won't have availability for the subject on that day.
Understood. And I didn't think there'd be enough time for it to be re-advertised for that meeting anyway.
Any other questions? Motion?
I'll make a motion to continue appeal Z-23-2016.
I'll second.
Okay. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
The motion carries. Next up, the appeal order was 23-2004, followed by 23-2005, followed by Z-23-2014. In a request to speed up the easier appeal, there was a mention of reordering the items so that Z-23-2014 would occur first. Is there any objection to that or a comment on that? Okay. Hearing none, we'll start with appeal Z-23-2014. Can you please come up and be sworn in?
Ed Olenek.
Sir, would you state and spell your full name, please?
My name is Ed Olenek, E-D-O-L-E-Y-N-I-C-K.
You solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give should be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yep. And just the background, got a new puppy. We are putting a fence. We'd like to put a fence in the back of our yard. There is a 10-foot wide easement. I believe it was a sewer easement between us and the neighbors. And so we would like the fence to go through that easement. We had a surveyor come out and take a look at it, lay it out, and you know, as well as identify where any utility lines are running and nothing runs through that area.
And just mark some exhibits. Sorry, just for the record. We're going to have the application as A1, the site plan as A2, proof of publication B1, proof of posting B2, and B3 notice to the neighbors.
Okay. Questions from the board?
Mr. Olenek, I'm assuming that, so the red marker is going to be the perimeter of the fence, correct?
I can't see it anymore. I'm sorry, but I presume, I mean, we wanted it for the back of the house. That's correct. Yes, sir.
So the fence won't go to the rear property line.
It does not. No, no.
Okay.
There's a stone retaining wall and there's some bushes and things like that that I'd still like to have access to. So
So will the rear fence be running through the sewer easement or just the two side fences?
the easement is, need the microphone. The easement is on the left side of the property.
Okay.
So yeah.
Yeah, and then it's for context, on the recorded plan for Rock Run, it shows a sanitary sewer easement. And Mr. Olenek got approval from Aqua to place the fence there. So
Okay. And then you said was it your fence company or an engineer surveyed? Someone did a survey and plotted that out.
We had a surveyor come out and do that.
Okay. Thank you.
So it's Aqua's easement then, not township.
yeah, correct. So anytime there's a sanitary sewer easement, we just advise the resident to get approval from Aqua, which he did. So it's an easement for Aqua, not the township.
Other questions from the board? Did you talk to your neighbors about this?
Yeah, interestingly enough, the neighbors on the side where the easement is, are like, well, I hope we get that because we may want to put in a fence and then at least we know part of it's already fenced off. So on the border. So
All right, is there any public comment here? Any public comment online? There's no drainage, no drainage units around. Guess we'll entertain a motion, board will entertain a motion.
Before a motion, I'm assuming Aqua told you that if need be, you would have to remove the fence at your cost and reinstall that.
yes.
And okay, I just want to make sure that you're aware of that.
I'll make a motion that we approve appeal number Z-23 2014.
I'll second that.
I'm gonna recuse because he's my neighbor.
Okay.
Yeah.
So last comment is there's 4 of us here, so you need a majority of 3 out of 4 for it to be approved.
Thank you.
Okay.
All right.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, motion carries. Appeal Z-23 2014 is approved as submitted.
Thank you.
Okay, look at my second. Yep. This. Yeah, both sets. I know. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, you can. Okay. Next up is Appeal 23-2004, and while the applicant gets situated here, Adam will read in the exhibits.
We have the application as A1 site plan, which is, I think like 7 or 8 sheets is A2. B1 proof of posting, or B1's proof of publication, B2 is proof of posting, and B3 is the notice to the neighbors.
Before we proceed, I just need to disclose that me and Mr. McGinnis have conducted business recently. That business has since transpired. We no longer have an active business relationship. I don't feel that I have a need to recuse myself. But if anybody has an objection to that, or if Mr. McGinnis has an objection to that, now's the time we should talk about it.
So, good evening, Mike McGinnis from Begley Carlin. I can affirm the representations that I did recently, a handful of months ago, provide legal services on a separate matter that has nothing to do with what's before the board this evening. I will, of course, defer to the board and the solicitor regarding the disposition for any recusal and abide by whatever the outcome is of that decision.
Township has no objection.
Yeah, I don't, and it's not an ongoing relationship, correct?
Correct. I'm not currently providing legal services and there's no pecuniary interest in any of our applications.
And nothing from that representation is anything from that representation relevant to this application at all? Okay, yeah, I think it's the right thing to disclose, but I don't think it warrants recusal.
Okay. And looks like everybody in the board's satisfied. So, do you need to be sworn in there?
We can have our witnesses sworn at the beginning. That's certainly fine. And I will state for both of our projects, I have Jonathan Geffman with me and Vince Fioravani as well. So be sworn in at the beginning.
Would you each state and spell your full name, please?
Jonathan Geftman, G-E-F like Frank, T like Tom, M-A-N. I'm the managing member of ADR Investments.
Vince Fioravante, the engineer on the project. That's Frank, I-O-R-A-V-A-N-T-I.
You both solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Okay. So, let's start with your presentation on Reading Avenue.
Thank you. Good evening. As I said, my name is Mike McGinnis. I'm with Begley Carlin. I am representing ADR Investments this evening with respect to their pending application on Reading Avenue. I have to my right, Jonathan Geffman, who is the managing member of ADR Investments, and I have to my left, Vince Fioravani, who is a project engineer. The property that is before you for consideration this evening is located at the border of Yardley Borough and Lower Makefield Township, directly across the street from the Yardley Country Club, as you can see on the plan that's before you. The tax map parcel is 20-34-20-001 and fronts along Reading Avenue. The property is approximately 0.38 acres and has a number of unique property characteristics. Yeah, we do have Mr. Fioravani's prepared a number of exhibits, which we'll go through with the board, but I think having on screen is helpful. Thank you. As you can see with the subject property, it is elongated. It is a wide but narrow property in terms of its depth. The property meets the gross lot size qualifications in the township and obviously already exists as a parcel, but its limited depth provides for some unique site constraints that would prohibit by right development. I actually believe, taking a look at this, that this property at some point was part of the railroad. And if you are standing on this property looking out onto Reading Avenue, the railroad, you can see the line to the rear, the rail line to the rear. The railroad actually controls a substantial amount of acreage to the left, again, from the property out onto Reading Avenue. To the right of the parcel, you can see the creek, and then you are in Yardley Borough. That property, which is, again, a bit elongated itself, is improved by a single-family detached dwelling, but a bit far from our proposed dwelling and property line. This property has been undeveloped, probably for the reasons we're going to discuss as part of this application. It does have woodlands. We are endeavoring to retain a substantial percentage of the woodland features on site. You can see what we're proposing is going to be substantially buffered on all sides, both side yards and the rear. But we are disturbing a bit of woodlands that would facilitate the construction of a single-family detached dwelling. We have tried to keep the scale of the improvements reasonable but consistent. So we have a proposed footprint that is, I believe, 1,574 square feet, along with a driveway, patio, and walkway. And again, this is our effort to have an appropriate size, single-family detached dwelling consistent with the community, but keeping in mind that we're attempting to have truly the minimum relief necessary as part of this application in accordance with the MPC. There is no clear site triangle issue with this development. Mr. Fioravani will testify to this momentarily, but I will say at the beginning, we did want to volunteer to the township and to the board. There is a notation on Mr. Fioravani's plan that says proposed guide rail. Because of the angle of the road, we don't think this is an issue, but if it's something the board would like for protective measures with respect to the proposed structure, we would be willing, as a condition of approval, to install a guide rail. We do need the following relief, and I will say as a housekeeping item, this was tabled before and the relief was updated to actually lessen the relief that we're seeking, but I will detail with specificity the variances. We previously were asking for a front yard variance of 7.3 feet when 35 feet is required. That particular distance is now 12.8 feet. So it was a revision to add a little over 5 feet from the front yard. Again, I will note, and Vince will cover this in a few minutes, the functional front yard to the edge of pavement is wider than 12.8 feet, but accounting for the right of way and the edge of the property line is 12.8 feet. We have a variance to allow a rear yard of 20.6 feet. When that was applied for originally, it was 10 feet. So I did want to note again the reduction of the relief that we're seeking. And then finally, we have a variance to permit a woodlands disturbance of 35.4%. That number was initially 55% as part of our application, and that has been reduced to 35.4%. We have, I would submit, carefully designed what is pending before the township for consideration. Everything on site that is proposed for any development would require woodlands removal. But we are attempting to minimize, as you can see, the trees that we're removing. Because of the lot depth, you cannot build a house, strictly speaking, in conformance with zoning. But again, we tried to establish a balance between reasonable development, reasonable relief, and the utility of the lot. And again, at the risk of belaboring myself at the outset of the hearing, I understand there are significant challenges for developing lots like this. As I said at the outset, there is a reason probably that this property has been undeveloped. But when you look at the big picture, I would suggest that we are keeping a strong buffer around the structure and behind the home. This would essentially be non-visible from either side. There is no home to the left of the proposed dwelling. To the right of the proposed dwelling, the home is a substantial distance away. The property backs on railroad tracks. The railroad owns land immediately to the left. And again, we are doing what we can to mitigate and minimize our disturbance. So I truly believe this is the minimum possible relief, and coupled with that, will have no impact on the surrounding community if the zoning hearing board were inclined to grant relief this evening. So I appreciate the indulgence with my introduction, and I would like to have Mr. Geffman offer just brief testimony at the outset, and then turn it over to Mr. Fioravani for what I imagine to be a little more substantive testimony regarding our development. John, you've been sworn in. Good evening. Can you,
Sorry. My apologies.
can you please state your name for the record?
Jonathan Geffman.
All right. Mr. Geffman, you are a managing member of ADR Investments. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
And you're the owner of the subject property?
Yes,
And that property is currently undeveloped. Is that right?
that is correct.
The particular lot is not rectangular. It's elongated and lacking depth. Is that a fair summary?
Yes,
All right. And what are you looking to do this evening?
to get approval so that we can take the property, develop it, and put up a single-family home to be resold.
All right. And why this size home?
It appears to be the right size based on engineering and what we understand would be an appropriate size, and also value for where that house would be.
All right. And our application requires front yard and rear yard relief. Is that correct?
That is correct.
As well as woodlands disturbance relief. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you are going to retain the woodlands on the property in a manner that's depicted on the plan before the board. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Which would maintain a buffer both to your side yards on either side and to the rear of the property. Is that correct?
Correct, just as drawn.
Okay. And the property has a rail line that runs off the rear of the property. Is that right?
That's correct.
And the railroad, the rail company actually owns property to the left of this site presently.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. I made a representation at the beginning that if it's desired as a condition of approval, you would work with the township and be willing to place a guide rail along a portion of the frontage in an area depicted on the plan. Is that right?
That's correct, if necessary.
Okay. And there are no improvements that you're envisioning to the site other than what's depicted on the plan. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And you will comply with township stormwater management ordinances in conjunction with the development of this home. Is that right?
As required, absolutely, yes.
Okay. And are you aware, my last question for you, Mr. Geffman, is, are you aware of any property in close proximity to this which has a similar front yard setback issue?
I believe the house that is adjacent, which would actually not be in Lower Makefield Township. This is actually the last lot in Lower Makefield Township. It's like a township line, I suppose, for lack of better expression. The neighbor, so to speak, is a newer home, I think built in the early 2000s, but it is in Yardley Borough municipality.
And then is it also true there is a home approximately 3 parcels over on Reading Avenue, which also has a similar front yard setback to what we're proposing?
Yes, but that is in Lower Makefield Township, not the one I was originally referring to.
I have no more questions at this time for Mr. Geffman. If it's okay with the board, I would suggest it might be helpful for me to offer Mr. Fioravanti to do a more elaborate breakdown of what we're proposing and then open it up for questions for the board.
Sure, go ahead.
All right. Vince,
Good evening, everyone.
please, before I have to qualify you, can you please state your name for the record?
Vince Fioravanti.
All right. And Mr. Fioravanti, can you just briefly detail the board what licenses you hold?
Civil engineer.
If I may.
Yeah.
Township's not going to oppose Mr.
Okay.
Fioravanti being
All right.
offered as a civil engineer. He's been in front of the board
Thank
more
you.
times than I can
All
remember.
right. Understood that.
And a pleasure each time.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. All right, Vince, can you just briefly
Yeah, we do have to state the board position on
Oh, I'm
that.
sorry.
So, yes, I'm aware that Mr. Fioravanti has been before us frequently.
Here we go.
So, I don't think the board has any objection to just proceeding here. So,
All right, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Vince, I'll turn the floor over at the beginning just to do an overview of the current site composition, if you can, and then we'll get into some specifics.
Would you prefer that I use the overhead or the exhibits behind me? The overhead? Okay. What I'll do I have a number of exhibits here and I'll just go through each one of them and just point out a couple of things that were the purpose of the exhibit, and then we can go forward with any questions from there. The first thing I'd like to say is if you look at this, it's an R2 zone. The parcel has the required lot area, 16,898 square feet, where 12,500 is required. So looking at the lot size, it's not an undersized lot. It's the shape of the lot that necessitates the variances. If you look at the front yard setback requires 30 feet, the rear yard's 45 feet, that's 75 feet. If you look at the exhibit, on the left, we're 34 foot wide. On the right, we're 77 foot wide. So when you apply the setbacks, there's no building area. So the lot's big enough, it's just oddly shaped. Now, while I have this exhibit up there, I'll show you how it would work if the house were to be built. So in the center, you see the house, 28 by 56, in the driveway. Its driveway is about 21 feet from the edge of paving, even though our front yard is 12.8 feet, to the property line, if you look at the left corner of the house. But we have 20 feet to the edge of paving. The site distances are good. You can't see it on this exhibit, but across the street's Country Club, and you're looking at greens and golfers, and so there's a nice view. But site distance and access is okay when you come out with your vehicle. There's plenty of site distance in both directions. And there's no extreme grades or hills or blind spots or anything. So access is fine. Mike mentioned the railroad tracks in the back, and there's no immediate neighbors. There's a Silver Creek to the right that goes underneath Reading Avenue to a pond on the Country Club. We'll see that in the next exhibit. But in terms of water and sewer, a little bit of design work involved. You can see a line has an FM on it, force main, that comes from the house, goes to a pit on either side. There's two pits on either side proposed of the stream. One is a boring and jacking pit, and the other is a receiving pit. We're taking the water and sewer lines through there. Essentially what you do is you dig pits on both sides, and then they can very accurately drill casings and sewer and water lines underneath the culvert, underneath the stream to the other pit, and then you pick it up and you continue it on to the house. If we look to the right, there's an existing subdivision over there. You can see force main connection location. There's an existing clean out and sewer system on the other side of the stream. There's water and sewer over there. And that services the next lot over that you'll show in an aerial. So water and sewer is not an issue. Stormwater is not a problem. We'll show you on another exhibit. Although the Silver Creek exists adjacent to the property, it's not in a floodplain. So there's no issue of it flooding at all. And we can do the typical underground stormwater seepage bed type ordinance compliance that we would have to do if we were to make it through the zoning step. I guess we can flip to the next exhibit. The red dot is the site. You can see the boundary between this township and Yardley Borough, very uneven here. There's a point right at our site. We're the last one in the township. You can see Silver Creek to the right as it passes under the stream. You can see the floodplain. You can see that the lot is completely out of the floodplain. And just when you talk about a unique lot, I mean, this lot has to be in the dictionary for unique situations. You take the railroad, and I think what happened here was, over the years when things were developed and a railroad came through and they took whatever they wanted, there was just an orphan piece of ground on the other side between Reading Avenue and the railroad. And I think that's the genesis of how we arrived in this situation. Although even as unique as it is, when we'll see the next slide, but it still does match what's going on in the community in terms of the lot shape, the proximity to the road. But in this exhibit, I just wanted to show that there's no danger of any kind of flooding if this lot were developed. We can go to the next slide. This is another slide just showing the uniqueness of the location, the township border and Yardley, and the railroad crossing through and kind of cutting off and isolating the property. That railroad's elevated. So it's literally a berm that comes by, and there's a sliver of land left over. And I think that's the genesis of how we arrived at this lot with the unusual dimensions. I can go to the next slide. Yeah, that came in sharp. Okay, so here's where we start to look at the surrounding community. The red dot again is the site. If you look across the Silver Lake to the right, you'll see the next dwelling, that one. That's one of the lots in an approved subdivision. The rest of them are actually approved as well, but never built. But there's a lot right there, similar in nature in terms of its proximity and its shape. It's not as irregular as ours. But if you were to look at that, you see the golf course and you see the railroad, and you see that lot and our lot on either side of the stream. It's kind of like a symmetrical look. If you were to come down the street, you're going to see two houses on either side of the stream, both close to the road. So it's not like we're putting something there that doesn't match the community. If we go to the far left, and I'll help here. You're right around Reading, and you'll see other dwellings also very close to the road. I have another exhibit that we'll get to where I show what I consider to be similar lots to ours between the golf course, Reading Road, and the railroad line. So my point with this exhibit is that what we are proposing here is, in character with the surrounding area, and it'll have no detrimental impact on anyone. None of the lots that I just mentioned will even be able to see our dwelling. As you're driving along Reading and you're looking to the right, you'll see a couple of houses, and we're not the only one. There's 3 or 4 that are very close to the road. No drainage impacts, no visual impacts. So I think it does match the community. I think it's a good use for a property that otherwise has no use, and would match the surrounding area, and would have a nice view actually, when you can see what it looks like across the street. Now we can take the next slide. Here's my similar lots slide. If you look to the bottom left, you'll see the site with the red dot, that's us. And then the one with the green dot, that's 21 Reading. I was talking about that one on the other side of the stream. So you can see 21 Reading up there on the left. Also close to the street, you can see the stream where the bridge is, and there'll be 2 dwellings on the other side of the stream, on the other side of the pond. If you look to the right, you'll see the pickup truck. That's kind of something you can use to measure the proximity of the house to the street. It's about, a pickup truck and a half from the street, which is about where we're going to be. So that's what I would call an equivalent dwelling right across the other side of the stream. And then there's another one with the blue dot bottom left. And that's the green, yes, next to the entrance to the golf course, 985. Now we look at 985, you go up to the right, there's a plan view, Google map there, there's 985. And you can see the dwelling, and it's angled towards the street. As it starts to get to the bottom of the exhibit, you'll see the pictures, roadside images of the dwelling, relatively new and very close to the street. And again, that's on the border with the golf course. So my point with this is that what we're proposing is not out of character with the area. And I think it would be good use for that irregular lot. We can go to the next slide. And these are just our plans. Let me see the next one. That's the existing, and one more. There's a subdivision across the other side of the stream. Our property is the extreme left there. Yep, that's us. And then there's water and sewer that were approved and constructed on this across from Pond Avenue. The rest of the dwellings were never built. This subdivision changed over the years. But the lot that we were looking at is a similar lot as that first lot that you see there. Yes, with that number, it looks like a number 7. That was the 7 lots that were approved back in the day. So this is kind of the genesis of the site and utilities that can serve it. And I think that's overall what we wanted to get at with our presentation, is that the lot it does have enough area. It's just irregular in shape, and it can easily be developed. And I think it would match the community. If there's any questions you have about any of this, let me know. That's my summary of it.
All right, just a couple quick housekeeping items, then we'll open up to the board. Learn not to ask you direct questions a long time ago, Vince. That was good answer to one question. All right, so in terms of the variances, we're asking for a 12.8 foot front yard variance, correct?
Yes.
All right. Do you have an opinion about that being the minimum relief necessary for construction of a single family dwelling?
Yes, I believe that is the minimum that would be required for us to construct a dwelling that would be in keeping with the community.
All right. And the rear setback is 20.6 feet. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. And you've already testified that you believe this would have no impact. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. And we'd keep the minimum, we would keep the visual buffer.
Yes.
All right. And the rear setback, is that the minimum relief that you believe is necessary?
Yes.
Okay. With respect to the woodlands, we're disturbing 35.4%. Is that the number?
Correct.
All right. Just briefly, can you just detail why we're disturbing 35.4% and can't comply with the 25% figure?
If we were to comply with the 25% figure, we wouldn't have enough clear area to build a house in the driveway. It'd be a very small house.
All right. And you heard the representation made earlier regarding the guide rail that we're offering. Is there any danger that you believe in terms of vehicular traffic vis-a-vis this proposed development?
I believe there is no danger. It's not like a situation where you have a sharp curve coming into the house and people can lose control and, by centrifugal force, the car goes off the curve and goes into the front yard. The access roads here are relatively straight. I don't really see that there's any need for the guardrail. Typically, you have a guardrail when you're next to a stream or there's some cliff or something very dangerous. I don't really see that to be the case here at all. There actually will be wooded area there, so there are trees there. So I think it'd be completely safe coming in and out, but we're willing to put it in if someone wants it.
Okay. Is there any reason, in your opinion, why this would have a negative impact on the surrounding residents or members of the community, broadly speaking?
No, I think it'll have no impact, no negative impact whatsoever.
Okay. And do you believe that this is the minimum relief necessary to reasonably use this lot?
Yes.
All right. I have no further questions for either of my witnesses at this time. I would just note as a housekeeping item, I would request maybe if we could mark the package of Vince's exhibits as applicant one or whatever, Mr. Flager, you would like to have them marked as.
We can do A3.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay, questions from the board or
I have questions,
All right.
but I'll let the board go first.
I have one quick question. How far are you from that underpass?
We can probably put up the aerial
Well, that's,
exhibit.
I'm not great at looking at it. How far away are you from that underpass? You know which one, the little,
The underpass is where that one similar lot was, like the one near the entrance to the country club in that direction. So can we get the
Yes,
exhibit up there with the aerial?
That's where
That
Valley
might-
Road intersects Reading.
thank you.
Where the trestle is.
Thank you.
Exhibit up there and take a look. Okay. And we're talking about the underpass. Are we talking about in this direction
It's
Right where.
down here?
right where the arrow is.
Where's the cursor?
If you read in the white space, it's about 500 feet from where the proposed house
Oh,
is
okay.
to the trestle.
Are you aware that in 1996, that whole area did flood? One person died. I know someone who was in a tree after getting out of their house.
Is that the Silver Creek?
The entire trestle area, country club, et
Here?
cetera. Yeah.
No, she's saying down where the road
Where the
intersects.
road was.
intersects
I mean,
is.
Where you are down here?
where the trestle underpass is.
The trestle underpass, Vince, is right at where the road turns.
Yes.
Okay. Oh, I see.
Okay.
Okay.
That's just one concern.
Yeah, I'm not sure what happened to cause that. I do know we're not in any kind of 100-year floodplain, with this proposal. So there could be something that happened. I mean, if there's something was blocked or something failed.
This was just a major rainstorm in June of 1996. And
I remember
it
that.
flooded, as well as a lot of other things in Yardley Borough.
Came up that storm. I think I was at the borough a few months ago for the Yardley Inn, and there was references to that flooding event that occurred.
Because
I forget
after the
exact-
bridge on Edgewood Road was out, as
Right.
well as
Mm.
Afton over the canal.
Yeah, I think from where we're located, I don't know that we would be subject to it or be increasing it by any means.
Okay, a question for Jim here. Dimensionally, they're fine with the setback from the creek, correct?
That is correct. I did verify that. And they meet our setback requirement.
Other questions from the board?
I'm waiting for Miss Kirk. I'm curious to see how that goes.
Okay, because we have it flipped to the map right now, I can't tell about whether our member online has any questions. Matt?
Where are you intending to put stormwater in this area?
The stormwater management for the property would be in the green areas that surround the dwelling. Will be like underground seepage beds under the driveway and around the areas that we show as being cleared.
Okay.
We don't
And
have,
how
we
far-
don't, we don't have that much in the way of impervious surface with a small development such as a house in the driveway. So we believe we can handle it in the perimeter areas.
Okay. And so I'm looking at your plan here and you have the tree line basically rubbing right up against the rear of the building. So your intent is to not have any clearance from the rear of that corner there to the tree line?
Well, we're looking at, in terms of an area of clearing, the shape of the cleared area might, be modified slightly, but we'll hold to the area that we've designated to be cleared. So we won't have the trees rubbing against the edge of the dwelling. We'll remove foliage and trees so that we have clear around the corner of the dwelling. But our area that we're going to clear we'll hold to that 35%.
Is there a possibility of moving your water and your sewer line to be underneath the driveway and then providing a bit more treed area along the edge of the driveway?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question?
So is there a possibility of, let me draw it, it'll be easier. So you have water and sewer coming out to the street out of 45. If we were to go straight out, keeping it underneath the driveway, this tree line could become right up against the edge of something like that.
Yeah, that is possible. The other thing we have to keep in mind too is the edge of the trees that we show is essentially a canopy. So the stems and trunks of the trees might be located, a few feet further outward. We're also going to have some grading. When we look at the driveway and the dwelling, as you know, you'll take an elevation in the street and you start to grade your driveway up. And if your driveway starts to rise a foot or so, then you have to blend the grade into the side. We could definitely save some, go 90 degrees and come out to the street. We'd like to have the jacking and receiving pits out of the highway. So we would have them, in the right of way area. But we do need some grading around the dwelling and the driveway. So you need some extra room to clear so you can blend the grades back into the natural ground. But we could save some tree clearing perhaps, when we get to that stage of design, we can look at taking it more to the right angle.
Well, this is a relatively flat site. I mean, you only got 2.5 feet of change over the length of the building.
Yes. Yeah, it is relatively flat, but we'll try to, as we grade the site, we'll keep, a 2 or 3% slope on the driveway and the dwelling and raise it up a little. And then from the dwelling out, we'll be grading back down like a 3 to 1. So you typically have a couple of feet where you're transitioning, with your grades. But it's got a good slope to it, good enough that we should have no problems with drainage on the property.
Yeah. How far away from the railroad tracks is this house?
Looking at it graphically, if you look at the 70 feet, when you can look at that exhibit graphically, that's 70 feet. So half of that's probably 30. There's probably another 60 feet from our rear line to the railroad tracks. And then we have a 20-foot rear. But those railroad tracks are elevated. They're way up in the air and wooded between. So they're well buffered.
Okay, Ms. Kirk, I believe has some questions here.
Yeah, Mr. Fioravanti, in the application, it says the proposed house would be 1,574 square feet. Would that be the same based on the amended plan?
Yes.
Okay. And there's a proposed driveway of 855 square feet. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. Is this going to be a single or two-story building?
I believe it's 2-story.
Now, there is the front yard setback, you said is 12.8 feet,
Yes.
and that's consistent along the whole frontage of the proposed house.
Yes. The house is parallel to the road line in that area.
And then there's the rear yard setback from the corner on the left side of 20.6 feet.
Yes.
What is the rear yard setback from the opposite corner of the rear of the house? Do you know?
No, I of course can get that number, but don't have it with me. I took the worst case, which would be the left corner.
But is it fair to say that that left corner would be a greater distance than the other side?
Yes, the right corner is the setback from the rear is going to be a greater distance than the left.
And you said that you need, there has to be disturbance of approximately 10.4% greater than permitted in order to build the house and driveway, correct?
Yes,
And that includes construction areas, correct?
yes.
Is this proposed house going to have a rear deck?
We don't have a rear deck shown on the house. We just have 28 by 56.
Okay. So if this house were to have a rear deck installed, would that mean that you'd have to come back for additional disturbance of woodlands?
It depends on the size. If you can look at the area that we have, the 35%, there is area around the dwelling that we set aside for our use, for stormwater, for grading. And as I stated, the actual shape of the canopy that we disturb can vary a little, but we're bound to be held by what we asked for. If we had a small deck off the back, if it was a 6 by 6 on the right side, we may be able to fit it. If we end up clearing less on the left side, we might be able to clear a little more in the back. But I think we need that 35% is about what we need to build a house, a driveway, and have room for grading. So I think if we had a small deck, we can probably do it without coming back. If it were to be larger, we'd have to come back.
But is it fair to say that the majority, like 3/4 of this lot is heavily wooded?
Yes,
All right. And based on the proposed location of the house, the property owner intends to retain woods in the rear, correct?
yes.
So what is to stop a future owner from trying to disturb more woodlands in order to construct accessory structures to that house?
I think that would be the
Barbara?
same situation as any lot in the township where you have a wooded lot and there's a dwelling on it. And if a homeowner wants to start cutting down trees in excess of what the disturbance is permitted, he has to go to zoning. So I don't think it's any different than any other dwelling.
But
Also put a notation in a deed restriction so that someone's on notice and the township has more enforcement powers.
so that would be an agreed deed restriction?
That's fine.
Okay.
Can we add markers to the deed restriction on the property so there's a visual identification of where that tree line is?
Yeah, we could have that as an exhibit too. I actually think we worked with the Zubeda Foundation, with the township and Ms. Burke to approve demarcation points for disturbance to ensure no more trees would be removed, and we'd be willing to do that here.
Now, the plan shows a proposed guide rail. Is that existing right now?
No,
What is the purpose of that proposed guide rail?
we were told there were some concerns about the access and the site distance and with the dwelling being so close to the road. I personally have no such concerns. As we talked about, the geometry of the road to me is safe, site distance is good. I don't really believe that it's necessary, but if someone had a concern, we'd be willing to do it.
I can answer that too. When we looked at this application, I thought the rear yard impact was basically non-existent because the property doesn't back upon a home or another use. And the woodlands disturbance, we think, is reasonable considering what we're keeping on site and the fact that some woods are going to have to be removed to develop the site ever in any capacity. So I thought the concern that could exist that would prevent the property from being developed would be the proximity of the home to the road. So in effort to mitigate any concerns, we were simply offering that as a potential condition if the township were so inclined, not that we believed it was necessary from a safety standpoint. So it was an overture that we were making, not one that, as Vince testified to, he thinks is strictly necessary.
All right, so that was just an additional condition to try to provide additional safety.
Correct.
But there was no independent site distance tests conducted or surveys conducted.
I believe it's unnecessary.
I mean, other than the one property that appears to look like it's in the borough, are there any other properties along this stretch that have guide rails?
Now, there's one at the stream crossing to the right where you see the stream crossing underneath Reading Avenue. There's guide rail there. That's it. Typically, guide rails are installed in areas where it would be very bad if you went off the road. And that would be, cliffs and streams. So that's the typical place where you would see one.
I do believe that's all I have.
Barb, I drive by there all the time and I drove by there. I don't think that house that is adjacent has a guard or guide rail.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
It does? Yeah, it does not. I didn't think so.
I drive here a lot and it does, I don't remember, I think I would notice of it by now.
Matt, you were saying?
No, there's no guardrail over there. So the applicant is agreeing to deed restricting the woodlands as well as having a visual identifier so that there's no mistaking that the trees are protected.
Yes.
And if I may offer one thing, I know, as Mr. Connors had stated, you do show the clearing limit right at the house, which I don't know how you're going to build it and dig it without disturbing that. I think you need to slightly reconfigure that wooded clearing area so that you're still at that 35%, but you provide adequate room from the rear of the house to where ultimately you'd be clearing, and then have that marked with a fence so that it's clear to the property owner that this is the limit of where you can go.
And my suggestion, if it's acceptable to the board, would be certainly if we were granted relief prior to any recording or any approvals, permits issued, et cetera, we would prepare an additional exhibit with some specificity that's circulated to the township in addition to the written agreement, and to Mr. Majewski for his comfort that we are able to construct the home while still maintaining the specific percentage relief that were granted. And that's fine as a condition as well.
Go ahead.
Question. I'm looking on the contours, railroad track 287 and road is 274. There's like 13 feet of difference.
Yes.
So how the stormwater is being controlled?
What happens in its current configuration is the runoff from the railroad tracks runs, of course, down the hill and then along the property and then into the Silver Creek and then under the road into the pond. What would happen when we were grading the site, as I was discussing briefly, we would take the existing elevation at the edge of the road, and then we would start to increase the driveway slope, maybe 2% or so. So as the driveway moves back towards the rear, it's coming up in elevation. So then when it turns into the dwelling would also be raised up a foot or two. So what would end up happening is there would be a swale between the house and the back property line, so that any runoff that came down off the tracks would hit the swale, then flow to the right and into the stream. So we would have to account for that little bit of runoff that comes off that embankment, but there would be a swale that would convey the runoff from left to right into the stream, and then it would go under the pond. And we also would have stormwater system on our site to take care of our impervious surfaces, so that when they would relieve to the stream, they would be controlled, so we're not increasing the peak flows. But we'd have to have a conveyance swale in the rear yard to take that runoff.
One more question. This guide rail you have on left side of the house, why not in front of the house?
What that was actually a potential guide rail. I believe we don't really necessarily need it. So I prefer not to put it in because I don't think they look nice. But if the board wanted it, we could put it in there. And the reason we had it in that location is we were addressing a concern that if a car were to leave the road and the house was close to the road, that it could be an issue. So that would prevent someone from striking the house if they lost control. I don't really feel that it's necessary. So there probably won't be a guardrail unless someone wants one.
Jim?
I don't really see.
Jim, can I ask you a question? We're talking about putting more water in that stream. Can that stream handle more runoff? If in your, from what knowledge you have, because I don't.
Basically, yes. They will have to handle all the stormwater runoff from that site. Right now, the water in that stream is sort of limited because you have the culvert underneath the railroad, then you have the bridge that passes the water. So there's limitations on how much water could get through there. And this is going to add a minuscule amount compared to the overall drainage area.
And we'll also be required by the township to control our stormwater. So we know we'll have to capture our own stormwater and hold it and release it slowly into the stream. So it should be a little bit less than what there is now.
Last question on the woodland disturbance, and this is for Jim. That would be a contribution of the tree bank then, correct?
No. That is only applicable to a subdivision and land development. It is not applicable to an individual house.
All right. Any other questions from the board before we go to public comment?
No.
Okay. Public comment in the room? Okay. Public comment online?
No public comment.
Okay. So I guess we'll entertain a motion for discussion from the board if there's no further questions at this time.
Make a motion to approve appeal number 23-2004, wherein we're going to allow front yard setback of 12.8 feet, where 30 feet is typically the minimum. Second variance to allow rear yard setback of 20.6 feet when 45 is the minimum, and a third variance to permit a 35.4% woodlands disturbance when 25% is the maximum. Furthermore, we need to have a deed restriction recorded stating that the maximum tree disturbance is 35.4%. Therefore, no more tree disturbance will be permitted, and we will need visual markers denoting where the trees are not to be disturbed.
Jim?
The board to add subject to approval of the township with respect to the markers.
Yes.
Subject to township approval as in respect to said markers.
Jim, can you confirm if this happens before a building permit gets issued?
Yes, we will absolutely make sure that that is done.
Okay. I'll second.
Any other discussion, comments?
Jim, I have a question for you. When digging foundation, et cetera, for the house, these are mature trees, so I'm sure they have very large. Is there anything that if they lose more trees due to the construction? I mean, it happens a lot. You know, you dig, you do a foundation, you're doing construction, and you plan on leaving all these trees, and then we have several that don't survive all of the trauma to their root systems or whatever.
I'm not sure how we could address that unless maybe you wanted to make a condition that if any trees are lost during construction, that they would have to replace them.
I think that would be,
But that would be up to you if you'd like to amend that motion.
I would move that if you lose trees to construction, you have to replace them. I mean, we're already upsetting a bit of a habitat anyway. We might as well at least try to keep it. I'd like to add that if that's okay to the motion, that if trees are lost during construction, they be replaced.
Sounds good.
I can get on board with that.
Okay. So. Yeah, I don't think that requires a vote since we're already at a majority there. If there is no further discussion, the motion as amended, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Okay, motion carries as discussed. Thank you very much. And I know you're not switching out, so I'll have Adam read in the next set of exhibits.
All right, we will have the application as A1, the plans again as A2. Proof of publication B1, proof of posting B2, and notice the neighbors B3.
Right. Good evening, Mike McGinnis, again from Begley Carlin here on behalf of the applicant ADR Investments. I think we should swear in Mr. Geffen and Fioravani at the outset since it's a new hearing.
Yes.
Would you each state your full names, please?
Jonathan Geftman, Geftman.
Vince Fioravante, Fioravanti.
Do you both solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
I do.
All right. Thank you, and I apologize. There's going to be some repetition, so I appreciate the indulgence at the outset. As I stated, my name is Mike McGinnis here with Begley Carlin on behalf of the applicant ADR Investments. To my right, I have Jonathan Geffen, who's the principal of ADR, and to my left, I have Vince Fioravani, who prepared the plan, which is before you for consideration this evening. This site is tax parcel 20-12-18 and fronts on Heacock Road. The property is approximately 0.4 acres gross. However, because there is a 120-foot right-of-way, 60 feet of which is on our portion of Heacock Road, it cuts down the net developable area of our site considerably. The specific calculation is our site is basically, unlike the last application, is a rectangular lot, but the net lot area comes out to be just over approximately 9,200 square feet. Similar again to the last application, the lot is in existence presently. We are endeavoring to develop the property with a reasonably sized single-family detached dwelling. Like the last application, we are seeking and would require a front and rear yard variance due to the narrow depth, which results from the right-of-way on Heacock. I am going to highlight a couple items at the beginning with respect to the front yard depth before citing the specific sections for the relief that we're looking for. Here, we are asking for a front yard variance of 8.5 feet. However, the functional depth of the front yard, as you're going to see on Vince's plan and what you can see on the physical plan before you this evening, is approximately 40 feet. And how I'm getting to that number is the front yard from the home to the edge of pavement along Heacock is approximately 40 feet, but the actual variance is 8.5 feet because of the extensive right-of-way along Heacock. So if someone is traversing Heacock and they're looking to the right, if this house was ever built, you would see a house functionally set back 40 feet from the edge of pavement, assuming Heacock is not widened at a later date. Second, I would note, again, being sensitive to the location in the front yard, that the adjacent property at 542 Heacock has two structures, which I believe are located as close or closer to Heacock than our proposed dwelling is. So again, I would respectfully suggest that our development is in keeping along Heacock with the surrounding community in terms at least of the front yard depth. The rear yard depth, which I expect potentially to be the more controversial component of this application, is obviously naturally more limited. To be frank, we have done what we can given the site constraints with the rear yard depth, but that space, no matter what we do, if you have a home on the site, is going to be limited. The variances, if we are granted, would allow for the construction in this instance of an approximately 1,568 square foot home in terms of its footprint, with a driveway and walkway. What we are willing to offer, and I don't know if the homeowner is present to the rear of this site, but understanding in a normal situation, if we were building either a single family home on one lot, or if I was in front of the board asking for a subdivision to facilitate construction where there'd be concern regarding rear yard depth, I would come in front of the board and say, we're going to work with the neighbors to buffer our property. We'll work with them to plant arborvitaes or something similar along our rear property boundary to mitigate any of those concerns. In this instance, because of our compressed rear yard, which is specifically 10 feet to the fence line, we would be happy if the neighbor, again, is here and is interested, even regardless if they're here, to plant arborvitaes if they're interested along their rear property fence. So it's an overture, again, if they're so inclined, that we would be willing to make as a condition of approval of a single family detached dwelling. I will say, when we took a look at this, trying to ascertain what the minimum reasonable development was, like the last application, we're trying to balance a home which is in keeping from the square footage standpoint with the community, while understanding we want to mitigate the impact that we could have on surrounding property owners. And that's how we came up with the plan and the number that's before you this evening. The rear property of the home that we back on, or would back on here, and we'll get into this in a second, would be approximately 95 feet from the rear of our home. So that is an 85-foot rear yard from the edge of that property owner to the fence line, and then another 10 feet from the fence line to what would be the rear of this house. I would suggest, and Vince will testify to this momentarily, that if you take a look at the tax map and actually look at 1601 Pen Oak Drive and 1602 Pen Oak Drive, the corner of those two homes are located approximately 42 feet from each other. So being mindful of the fact that we have a compressed rear yard, the actual distance from the rear of our home to the rear of the home immediately behind this house is actually twice the distance, more than twice the distance of the side of the home at 1601 and the side of the home at 1602. So understanding there's site constraints, we truly believe that this is the minimum relief that would satisfy the MPC criteria for the construction of a single family detached dwelling. And we need two variances, no natural resource variances, but we do need relief, again, to permit an 8.5-foot front yard when 100 feet is required because of the special setback in the ordinance, and then a rear yard of 10 feet when 50 feet is required. And again, I think the board can probably do the math, understanding the special setback requirements. We literally have no building envelope on the site without zoning relief. I, again, as I said, have Mr. Gepman and Mr. Fioravani with me. I would like to offer Mr. Geffman for a very brief testimony and then turn the floor over to Vince to do a similar discussion as was just undertaken with Reading Avenue. So thank you for your consideration.
Yes.
Jonathan?
Yes.
Good evening. Can you please state your name for the record?
Jonathan Geffman.
All right. And you're the managing member of AUR
I
Investments?
am.
Okay. And you're the owner of the subject property?
Yes, that's correct.
The property is currently undeveloped. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And what are you looking to do with this property?
Develop the property and build a single family home to be resold.
Okay. And why, again, the size of this home at this location?
Based on the size of the lot, this seems to be the appropriate style and size home for the lot.
Okay. And the house would be 2 stories. Is that correct?
That is the intention, yes.
All right. And our application requires both front yard and rear yard variance. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay. Practically speaking, this home, if it was constructed, would be built approximately 40 feet from the current edge of Peacock Road. Is that your understanding?
Yes, that is correct.
And there would be a 10-foot rear between the edge of this home and the existing fence line. Is that right?
Yes.
Okay. I made a representation at the beginning, understanding there's a abbreviated rear yard that you would be willing to volunteer to plant arborvitaes along the rear property boundary with 1601.
Yes, a buffer of a tree.
Okay. And then you're familiar with the subject area and surrounding parcels. Is that correct?
I am, yes.
Okay. And that includes the neighboring property. Is that right?
Yes, that is correct.
And are there structures which exist on the neighboring property which are as closer to Heacock Road than this home would be if it was built?
Yes, that is correct.
And again, understanding if you're approved, you would have to install stormwater management mitigation measures to offset any increased runoff. Is that correct?
Yes, yes, it is.
And you're willing to do that?
Yes, I am.
Okay. I have nothing further at this time for Mr. Geffman. If it's okay with the board, I would like to offer Mr. Fioravani and walk through this plan as well. Okay. Good evening, Vince. Can you please state your name for the record?
Vince Fioravanti.
Okay. And again, not to belabor the point, but I would like to offer Mr. Fioravani again as an expert in civil engineering.
No objection.
No objection.
Thank you. Mr. Fioravani, you prepared the plan, which is before the board. Is that correct?
Yes,
All right. I'm going to cede the floor to you at this point.
thank you. If I could have the exhibits on the screen, I'll do what we did on the last one and just kind of flip through them and highlight a couple of things on each exhibit. Okay, we'll start out with the rendered exhibit before you. You can see the shape of the lot. In this situation, I think both applications are similar, but in this situation, we do have a uniformly rectangular property. Again, I think orphaned by development that occurred around it over the years. You can see that the property actually goes to the center of Heacock Road, as a lot of the deeds did in the old days. The problem here is that Heacock Road has a 120-foot ultimate right-of-way. So you take 60 feet out of the property and then you're left with, 40 some odd feet left, a small depth for the property. Again, it's got a lot of width, but challenged in the front and the rear yard dimension. So we look at the property here. You can see where we have the driveway access. Again, street access is easy, level, good sight distance, 40 feet from the house to the street. So this one's set back further than the other application. But again, good street access. When you look at Heacock Road, 1 lane in each direction, full shoulder, left turn lanes in the center. So it is easy. It's close to Cardinal, which when you're looking at, driveways and intersections on opposite sides of roadways, close to the intersection with Cardinal is better. It's open there. But access is easy. And again, there's full shoulders, there's left turn lanes. So back and forth for one dwelling won't be an issue. Even going forward, again, with this one, there'll be no negative impact to any of the surrounding community. We're not tying into any neighborhoods. There's no stormwater draining across anyone's lots. We have public water and sewer available. You can see the dark line. It was essentially a limit of disturbance. We went a little bit further with this one. You can see the water and the sewer lines for this property are available by access through a public road to the development across the street. Again, we have a force main for the water connection. This time we don't need any boring and jacking pits. It's an easy crossing. And there's a terminal manhole for the sewer system across the street, which we have access to. And there's also a water main, which isn't shown here, but there's a water line in that same area. So that same trench can provide water and sewer across Heacock Road, all in public right of ways without any easements. In terms of stormwater, on the upper right, you can see a seepage bed there. We actually have a downspout collection system designed on this one to a seepage bed in that area. And if we zoom out a little bit on this one, you can see that drainage wise, the drainage patterns here go to a stream again. So there's no runoff that will be running across anyone's properties that do any harm. The natural runoff from this property is into that stream. We'll be taking our water into the seepage bed, and then the natural water would flow across into the stream the way it always has. We can take the next exhibit. Always interesting to see how we got here. That's the site. So if you're wondering how that lot ended up there, as I said, over time, roads are widened and large tracts of land are developed, and whoever owned that piece wasn't part of the development. So you can see that corner lot there existed. Developments happened around it. Roads were widened on either side of it, and it just really got orphaned and left over. So that's why I included the subdivision, just to show how we got to where we are. We can have the next slide. This one shows a few things. The red is our site. The blue is where the water main is located, and the green and cardinal is where the terminal sewer manhole is that we would come down and connect to. You see the blue dots where the drainage swale on the right is. And if you look at the contours, that's where the drainage from this whole area would reach its final destination, tributary to Brock Creek and then to Delaware River. So our stormwater essentially runs to that stream, and as you can see, without impacting anyone else's lots. So there, again, there's going to be no impact from our proposal to any of the surrounding neighborhoods. No vehicular access, no drainage. The only thing one could possibly say would be visual, that I can see the dwelling from my dwelling. But look at the buildings on this exhibit. You can see the houses. You can see the red dot and the distance to the red dot, from the red dot to the dwelling behind us. And then you can see the distance from the dwelling behind us to the dwelling to its right. And that's going to be closer than our dwelling would be. So I think we're really not that close to any dwellings. I think visually we can mitigate that with buffering. We're offering to buffer on the opposite side of the property line as well as our side, if that helps. But no vehicular access, no drainage impact, no water, really no impact whatsoever to any of the community members. And then we can do this on the next exhibit, but there's also other dwellings that are similar and close to the road, similar to ours. I can have the next exhibit. Again, the red dot is the site. You can see the fenced yard to the rear of the nearest adjoiner on the cul-de-sac. And then if you go down a little ways to where the 150 is on the street, you can see the dwelling next to us. There's multiple structures on that property, but that one is very close to the street. That's one of the similar lots that I have photographs of. So again, if you're traveling down the street, you're traveling down Heacock, you're looking to the right, you would see that dwelling next to us, close to the street, and then you would see our dwelling, not even as close to the street. We're 40 foot back, but in character, where you do have vehicular access to the street, and I don't think would have any impact on any surrounding areas. We can take the next slide. Here's what I would with the similar dwellings. On the left is a red dot, that's us on that left map, and then you see the blue dots, and they're the similar dwellings. 542 Heacock is the ones that we're pointing to, and I have a road image of the dwelling, and that dwelling is actually angled towards the road, so that where the arrow is right now, it's very close to the road. much closer than we're going to be, and with a driveway access to this same street. So I think in keeping with the surrounding area, we will have a dwelling, if it was permitted by the board, that would access the road. We would need the variances for the setbacks. But other than that, I think it would be a typical dwelling, would match the community and would have no detrimental impacts. I think that's probably all I need with the exhibits.
All right, thank you, Vince. Just again, a couple small housekeeping items. We'll turn it over to the board. So I made a representation at the beginning due to the special setback along Heacock that we have a extremely limited building envelope. Can you speak to that briefly in terms of the building envelope and what we could do here?
Yes, there's a special setback on the street that requires a 100-foot setback. And there's also a rear yard setback of 50 feet. So when you combine the two of them, 150 feet, and you look at the amount of land we have left over, we're probably a 50-foot by, let's say, I don't have it on this exhibit, but we're probably 50-foot wide and we have 150 feet of combined setbacks. So if we honor the setbacks, there'll be no building envelope whatsoever.
Okay. And we're asking, as we've discussed at length, for an 8.5-foot front yard variance. Do you believe that's the minimum relief necessary here for construction and use of this property?
Yes, I tried to put a reasonable sized dwelling on the property, leaving me 10 feet in the back and 8.5 feet in the front. That's all the room we have in depth for the building envelope. So it's putting more towards the back, but leaving some in the front. And that's what I believe to be the minimum.
Okay. And then you touched on this briefly, and I made a representation at the beginning that approximately from the rear of 1601 Pen Oak to the rear of our proposed dwelling is approximately 95 feet. Do you believe that's an accurate number?
Yes, correct.
Okay. And the edge of the structure on 1601 to its neighbor on 1602 Pen Oak is approximately 43 feet. Do you believe that that is a accurate number?
Yes.
Okay. And then just briefly to go down the list here, based upon your recitation of how this lot has been created and has been maintained, do you believe it meets the criteria for there being unique physical circumstances and conditions, including topography, for the subject parcel?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. And you've testified to the limited building envelope. So do you have an opinion as to whether these circumstances prohibit development in strict conformance with the zoning ordinance?
Yes, without zoning relief, nothing can be built on this property.
Okay. And you testified to previously that this lot's existence predated our client's acquisition of the property. Is that correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Which in your opinion would mean that the hardship and the relief we're seeking was not created by our client. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. And you have testified to previously, but again, and not to belabor the point, but can you state your opinion as to whether the construction of this home would alter the essential character of the neighborhood or permanently impair the appropriate use of the development of adjacent parcels?
As I had stated, I think there's no adverse impact or no impact at all from the development of a dwelling on this property to any of the surrounding properties. There's no vehicular access. There's no stormwater impact. The utilities can be reached without any easements. Literally, there'll be no impact whatsoever to any of the surrounding areas, and it'll match in character as well.
All right. And do you have an opinion as to whether this is the minimum relief necessary to construct a home on this lot?
Yes, this is the minimum relief.
Right. I have nothing further for either of my witnesses. I would just make the same request that we could move Mr. Fioravani's exhibits into evidence, Mr. Flager.
E3.
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Questions from the board?
I guess I really don't have any questions. I just have some comments. I mean, I think I agree with you, Mr. Fioravani, that this is the minimum relief requested. I really don't have a problem with the front setback. I have a massive problem with the back setback. I mean, I've sat on this board for a while and we sweat sheds being inside the minimum setbacks and detached garages. We're talking about a house that's going to be 10 foot off a property line. And Mr. McGinnis just brought up that this lot pre-existed. The owner, it was here. The owner didn't create this, right? This condition, this lot like this with the ultimate right of way existed before he bought it. Well, he bought it in 2018 for a recorded price less than $3,000. And we have neighbors on Pen Oak who have been there for, I don't know how long. I didn't look up, but they significantly have invested more. And I just have a huge problem with this property being 10 foot off a property line. Not a question, just my comments.
Can I just say, I agree. I looked at the tiles on the floor. If I'm not mistaken, they're 12 by 12. That would mean the property line would be from here to the wall. And it's very nice to plant arborvitaes on someone else's property, but they would need to be on your property. And I had a slab when I bought my house in the back that was 10 foot by 20. It was small. And I have a major, major problem with 10 feet in the back. I'm sorry, but I guess not every property needs a house on it. This may be one of those, except, you know, I have a problem with that. I'm sorry.
All right, any other immediate board questions before I ask Ms. Kirk for her opinion?
And can we dive into the square footage of this lot? The overall square footage is identified as 21,300. And then we have a minimum net area, which is identified as 9,300, which I believe is the dark bold line surrounding the lot outside of the ultimate right of way. Vince.
Yes,
Microphone.
the overall dimensions of the property are 106 by 200 out to the center of the street. And then when you take the 60 foot away, you're left with 4650 by 200. So 4650 would be the width of the, the depth of the lot, and 200 would be the width.
So essentially, we're talking about a lot that's 9,300 square feet.
Yes.
At the end of the day.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Which is less than the buildable lot requirement.
Of 13,500, yes. I also note that side yard setbacks are required 15 feet. I know it doesn't sound good when a rear yard is 10 feet, but a compliant side yard between a property line and a building is 15 feet. And again, we did mention we're 95 feet from the nearest house, even though 10 feet from the property line.
And can you elaborate when you state that the house is typical of the neighborhood? There's one other lot, which is, I believe, the existing farmhouse for the subdivision behind, which is small and actually has a significant size lot to back it up. There's no other house on Heacock Road. It's a collector street connecting basically the mall area to a mall area. And you're talking about putting a residential property on it.
And there aren't many driveway accesses to Heacock. It is a collector road with 120-foot width. Adjacent to us, as we had depicted, there is a dwelling closer to the road with a driveway access. And then if you were to continue in that direction, where there's an overpass, there's another dwelling. So there's not many driveways on Heacock, but there are some. There's one immediately adjacent to us, and then one maybe, I'm going to guess, a mile or so down. But most of them are not, as it's a collector road. But we wouldn't be the only one. Again, there is one adjacent and then one maybe a mile down the road in the same direction.
I presume Barbara has questions.
He does. I just was giving the board the first chance here.
So, Mr. Fioravanti, on that map, what is the lot across the street from the property? Is that the dog park?
Which way are you
See
talking
the
about?
red dot?
Yes, here,
Yep, across Heacock. What's across the,
here.
yes.
I don't know that there's anything here. This is the subdivision across the street in an open space in this area.
Okay.
It looks like detention.
Yeah, it's the detention pond.
Detention pond.
The dog park is south of us, Barbara.
And you said during your testimony that Heacock Road is 120 feet wide right away.
Right away, yes.
That's 60 feet on either side of the center line.
Yes,
And do you agree with Mr. McGinnis's representation that but for that right of way, the property could have a 40-foot front yard setback?
yeah, well, if we look at our gross square footage, it'd be 21,000 square feet. So we would be compliant if it wasn't for that went to the center of the street. As many of the old deeds did, but once you take that big of a right of way out, then it creates this situation that we have.
So the edge of pavement to where our home is presently, I had represented as approximately 40 feet. I think Ms. Kirk is just requesting that to be confirmed.
Yes, that's confirmed. That's a distance from the dwelling to the edge of paving, but not to the right of way.
Edge of paving.
Right.
Do you know how wide the current paved lane is on Heacock adjacent to this lot?
Well, we have a center lane that's, a two-way left turn lane. There's two travel lanes, one in each direction, and then a full shoulder. I don't have it. I mean, I could easily get it if I had my computer here, but I'd say probably 60 feet in width total.
Of
Paving.
the whole paving.
Yes, all the different lanes combined.
So from the center lane adjacent to, that runs along adjacent this lot, what is the width of the main lane?
Well, there's a left turn lane, so we'll have half of that. Then there's a travel lane, which is probably 10 or 12 feet. And then there's a shoulder, which is probably 8 feet. So 12 and 8's 20, and then maybe half of probably 30 feet.
Probably 30 feet.
Mhm.
So if this house were moved forward towards Heacock for another 10 feet, it encroaches in the ultimate right of way, correct?
Yes.
But what is the likelihood, if you know, of that roadway being widened in light of its current configuration?
I think it'd be very unlikely.
So if you move the house forward towards Heacock by 10 feet, that gives you an additional 10 feet in the rear. Isn't that correct?
Yes, but we'd have to get permission to be within the ultimate right of way there.
Okay. How close to the edge of the ultimate right of way can this property be, this house be?
Well, with a variance, we could be on the line.
And that gives you how much?
Another 10.
Another 10.
Yes. 8.5. I'm sorry.
Okay, so even if you move it another 8.5 feet forward and put it right on the line of the ultimate right of way, you can increase the rear yard setback by
Yes.
8.5 feet.
Yes.
So it won't be 10 feet to the property line.
Yes, we do have the flexibility. We have 8.5, our net lot area. We have 8.5 in the front and 10 in the rear. So we could move the house forward and provide more in the rear.
Okay. Now, the other house along Heacock is the old farmhouse, correct?
Yes, to the right as you're standing on Heacock.
What is the width of this proposed house?
Of ours,
Yes.
56 by 28,
So is there any way to narrow the width of the
at
house
28.
and elongate it so that it would more better fit the lot and maximize the yard setbacks that could be available?
I think we probably could take a couple of feet off the 28.
Because it's going to be a two-story dwelling.
Yes,
And the schematics of this house is not going to exactly fit with what's in the other developments, correct?
correct,
And it's because of the constraints of the lot.
correct.
And that is something that could be done, that could maximize the rear yard setback to lessen the impact between the two lots, this lot and the one behind it.
We could change the dimensions to move more of the nonconformity to the rear. I think we could do that.
And if we do that, how much of a rear yard setback do you think? And I know this is an estimate, but how much of a rear yard setback do you think you could get?
I think if we kept a couple of feet off the ultimate right-of-way line, let's say 2 feet or so, and then we took another, so that gives us 6 feet more. And then we took 2 feet off the dwelling, that gives us 8 feet more. So we might be able to get that to 18.
And if you do get it to 18 feet, is it in order to assure that there won't be any further encroachments of structures in that rear yard? And I guess this might have to go to Mr. Giftman. Would you be agreeable to a deed restriction that would prohibit the building of any further structures in the rear yard area?
Yes, I would.
I have no further questions.
I have one question here. All of these restrictions, the setback requirements that were in place when this lot was purchased, correct?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
All these setback requirements were in place when the lot was purchased, correct? There's been no changes in the township ordinance.
I'm not able to answer that question. I apologize.
There have been no changes.
Thank you. Any other board comments right now before I go to public?
No comments.
Okay. Public comment in the room here. Does anybody want to come up and make testimony, provide testimony? Hand her the microphone. You're gonna need to state your name and address and get sworn in.
State and spell your full name, please.
My name is Deborah Carmels, Karmels. I am the owner of 1601.
I only swear the testimony about to give shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
Yes,
Thank you.
1602. I'm all shook up because this is just, I'm beside myself over this. I don't care that it's 95 feet from my house to this proposed house. It's essentially being built in my backyard, and I have to raise my hand and say, no way. We're not asking for a few feet variance here. We're asking for an extreme variance. And there's a reason why this property has changed owners so many times in just the 12 years that I've been here. And I just wanted, that's all I really wanted to say, is that it's going to take from my property, whether these people believe it or not. It essentially will be in my backyard. And putting trees in my backyard is going to take from my grandkids' area that they play in. And that's not an option for me.
Can I ask you a question? So Ms. Kirk put forth a question to Mr. Fioravanti about moving the house closer to the ultimate right of way and possibly having an 18 or 18 and a half foot rear setback. How do you feel about that?
It might as well be 10. It's really not a lot of footage.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other public comment in the room here? Okay, and I believe you answered the question before. Is there any public comment online?
No public comment.
Okay. So back to the board for discussion and or a motion.
Just to clarify a couple things, if you were going to move it closer to the right of way, I think you would need to re-advertise since you would have more relief than has been advertised. And given the nature of the type of relief, I don't think it's a de minimis undertaking. So just bear that in mind.
I will say, given my observation of the disposition of the board, seems like that would be unnecessary. But certainly if the board were to tell us to re-advertise and come back, we would be willing to do that. I appreciate the note, Mr. Flager.
I'll make a motion to deny appeal number 23-2005.
I'll second.
Okay, the discussion. Okay, all those in favor of the motion to deny the appeal for 23-2005?
Aye.
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 Okay. Motion carries. So the appeal 23-2005 is denied.
Good night. Appreciate your time this evening.
Did I not call you going forward?
Vince is just getting ready for round 2 on deck. All right, other business. The next meeting is dedicated to the Selco. appeal.
Actually, we do have an update. I know several of the attorneys have been discussing it, and it's possible that they will be doing an extension of time on that. So it looks like we have a few other appeals scheduled for that meeting, but they will be sending us something shortly about what date they anticipate coming in, either in September or October.
How many times have they requested an extension on that?
I'm sorry.
Don't we have to vote on the extension continuance here, or are they going to have that?
We haven't received it yet.
Well, we haven't
So you would
received.
vote on
yet.
it at the next meeting.
But I mean, generally, my question is
That impacts
how many-
attendance and everything here.
Wait, we have
Oh.
other things on the agenda?
Yes.
Oh, I thought it was.
I
thought it was
thought
clear.
when we initially scheduled this, we were aiming for a,
Well, based on discussions, it sounded like it was heading towards an extension, so we scheduled a few others.
okay, because that impacts attendance of some members here. So,
Okay, and you said we had 3? If that gets postponed, we would have 3 regular non-cell tower or
mhm.
thereabouts? I didn't.
I think that's,
Okay, no, I'm just trying to clarify.
Right.
Just dictates what clothing I'm wearing, but else I should still be here either way.
I guess the question would be the dates in September, October.
that is something to be determined. So if I have more of an update, other than in my discussions with the attorneys, it sounds like it will not be on August 1st. They are compiling some additional information, and depending on how quickly they can get that together, depends on whether it'll be a September or October meeting date.
It would probably be helpful if they picked at least a day per month anyway, since we know this is going to take more than one session.
Yes.
Yeah, and I discussed that with Ken Fetterman, who's conflict counsel, as far as figure that out with all the attorneys now. So that way you can kind of have one meeting a month for that and one for all of our other business, so that it doesn't interfere.
Would not be, I don't think they would do it October 3rd. I don't think they could. It's on.
Well, they can, they can. That's
Yeah,
fine.
they can.
Well, I think October 3rd was not available for one of the attorneys, so it'd be September 17th or whatever the date is, or October 17th.
Or both. Mhm.
Or both.
All right, but we can, if we're having a regular meeting and we have other things, we can vote formally on the continuance August 1st, and then we'll have a normal meeting. And obviously, Jim, you always do a great job of putting it on Facebook and the township page so that everyone doesn't have to come here if they don't.
And I spoke to the attorney for some of the parties in opposition to that appeal. And he had told me that he had been in discussions with the Verizon attorney. So they're aware of that already.
Good. All right, good. All right, so we just need to adjourn.
Make a motion to adjourn.
So moved, we adjourn.
All's in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, meeting's over.
Have a
great night.
Hey, bye, Jim.